So far, so good. I decided to take you through the story of Ulysses Grant in Missouri by examining this particular word and examining some of the people he came in contact with in about the first 6 months that he was a Civil War command. He spent most of that time, almost all that time in Missouri, and he came across some curious characters, to say the least. Let's start with the first person I will talk about is Simon Good, the Colonel of the U.S. Army. And part of my objective here, a very alert and interested audience, is I want to see if you all at the end of this, first of all, I want you to have questions. And secondly, tell me who you think was the nemesis in all this story. So I'm going to start with Simon Good, but that's just a side story, really. What I want to cover in this section, there's 5 sections here, so I'll also watch the time. I'm going to talk about Mattoon, Illinois, where a regiment was formed. We call it the Regiment of the 7th District of Illinois, because when Illinois first started raising troops, and they raised troops like crazy right in the beginning, each of the congressional districts in Illinois raised their own regiment. And the Regiment of the 7th District started out and did their basic training in Mattoon, Illinois, which is a little bit south and west, or south and east of Springfield. What you see here, this picture, happens to be, I think it's a Wesley's Weekly illustration. It came out in 1861, and there is a fellow here by the name of John Wood. He's not one of the nemesis, but he is the founder of Quincy, Illinois, and he spent a year as governor of Illinois before the Civil War, and he was apparently running for governor again because he persuaded somebody to put him in this picture, even though he wasn't there. So. But the Battle of Monroe Station is what's depicted here, and that's Monroe Station, Missouri, in the Monroe City now it's called, the very northeast corner of Monroe County. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk in this part about Grant coming to rest, as it were, in Mexico, Missouri. And this is the first phase of things, I guess. Simon Good. He was a soldier of fortune, I guess you would say, at least according to the stories that he told. And he supposedly was with Walker in Nicaragua and all sorts of things. And he somehow got the men who were assembling in Mattoon for the 7th District Regiment to vote for him to become the colonel of the regiment. And so he undertook that task. It just so happened that Ulysses Grant, now most of you probably know what a miserable time he had as a civilian and in the Army earlier on, and all the difficulties he went through. But he was still on the tail end of that phase of his life. He tried to get a command. He had been a regular captain in the regular Army, but he was in Galena, Illinois at the time, and instead of taking the office of captain of a mere company, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. But he happened to meet the governor of Illinois at the time, the new governor, and he got sent to Mattoon to enroll the soldiers that were assembled. Okay? And he made a tour, as it were, a lot of different places in southern Illinois to do the same thing. So he wasn't really an officer of any troops. He was an administrator. So, well, Simon Good turned out to be not so good. There are many of Grant's biographers that have given some mention of the man, but never until this past year has the subject been explored in detail like it has by author Tom Emery, who wrote in an Illinois history magazine about him. Well, as it turns out, well, first of all, he fancied himself a new Napoleon. He would walk around camp with a Napoleon cape on. He posted a guard so that his soldiers, who had no discipline at all, and nor was he about to give them any, couldn't escape to go into town to chase the girls, as they said. But then once in a while he would escape and go to the taverns, including going to the taverns with the men. So anyway, it came time for the 7th District Regiment to move to Springfield, where they really were going to get into basic training. And the men who had elected, as Mr. Emery calls them, the oddball of history, said, we don't want to go to war with this guy, and can we get somebody else? So some of the men said, well, you remember that fellow that came down here to enroll us? Why don't we get him to come and be our colonel? Well, sure enough, the governor got a hold of Grant and said, you go down to Springfield, you're going to be the colonel of the 7th District Regiment, which, voila, turned into the 21st Illinois Infantry, right there in Springfield. Grant spent a few weeks there, starting in mid-June, and as of, July 3rd, 1861, they were ready to go into battle, ready to go enter the war, as it were. So they were supposed to be coming into Missouri kind of at a leisurely pace, and so Grant marched these men, these raw men, about 80 miles across Illinois when he had a railroad he could have used. And he decided, well, he's going to see if he can toughen them up. Halfway through that process, this happened, the Battle of Monroe Station. And so he got orders, get those men over to Missouri as soon as you can. He got on a train at that point. He got, the same day, he got to Quincy and crossed the river and was in Missouri. And from that point on July 11th, 1861 until early November, his center of his attention was Missouri. The battle, so-called at Monroe Station, didn't turn out to be anything like this picture. But it was the first really, it's essentially the first, I think, the first battle that involved a railroad in history. What had happened was, this was a railroad junction. Some fool from Illinois, colonel, another fool, goes off into basically the hinterland looking for some state guardsmen, and while he's gone, they burn all his supplies and all his railroad cars back in Monroe Station. So that is why all of a sudden the alarm rang, and they said Grant and other troops got over to Monroe Station. Grant spent about a week west of there, a place called Honeywell, Missouri, where these state guardsmen had destroyed a railroad bridge on the Hamilton St. Joe. And so he was guarding that site while the engineers were rebuilding the bridge. And then he finds his way to Mexico, Missouri. He stays in Mexico as long as he did anywhere, I think, in Missouri in 1861. And I think it is time to see the next picture. What you see here is a picture of what was the John Clark Mansion. It was built in 1859 in Mexico. And it still stands as now the headquarters of the Audrain County Historical Society. So you may go there and see that. And we do know that Grant was in that building. When he first arrived, he had, there was some guy who was allegedly a bushwhacker, and he was relative of the guy who owned the house, and somehow that all got worked out, and he wasn't the right guy at all. But in any case, the most important thing that happened probably in Mexico is that his chaplain, his regimental chaplain, picked up a St. Louis newspaper one day. It was around the 4th of August, and ran into Grant's tent and said, General, he essentially had been nominated and the Senate had confirmed him to be a brigadier general. And so Grant, all of a sudden, was very popular. Actually, and I'm going to explain that in a minute here, but because this was all new to the Union Army, they managed to appoint 37 brigadier generals and volunteers pretty much all at the same time. And there were 3 of them from Illinois. One of them was Grant. Anyway. I want to point out this image because part of what I'm going to talk here about is the artwork that was evolved in those first months of the Civil War here in Missouri. How many of you know Mike? Oh, sorry. How many of you have been to Ironton and the Pilot Knob and Southeast? Oh my goodness, quite a few of you. This is Pilot Knob. And there is an artist, a fellow named Henry Luppy, who I believe was Prussian and immigrated to the U.S., who drew this from the spot there on top of that mountain. And I'm going to describe in a minute here what's going on over here, but these are troops that are coming in to relieve Ulysses Grant in August of 1861. So anyway, we're going to talk about General Benjamin Prentiss, the U.S. Army, who was one of those 37 brigadiers and a candidate for nemesis. So here are the subjects I'm going to cover. And into the SARM, I simply mean this is when Grant got an order from General Fremont in St. Louis, and it said basically he had been communicating with St. Louis headquarters because he was one of these brigadiers, and they sent him an order calling him in command of the Ironton Force, and they made a big effort to send him from Mexico down to Ironton because Ironton was, there were regular Confederate troops perhaps 25 miles south of Ironton ready to attack, and this was all going on in connection with the invasions that were happening in the Southwest that resulted in Wilson's Creek. Commissions all around, but what I mean to be talking about is what I just said. It was sometime in early August that all of these appointments got sent to Congress, and all these men were appointed generals, and for whatever reason this was, most of them got backdated, the effective date to I think it was May 17th, and not different dates, but all the same dates. And why they wanted to do that other than it was the Army, I don't know, but I think it's fair to say that never in the history of the U.S. Army, before or since, have there been so many people who gauged their seniority by a single date, and that leads a little bit of the story of Benjamin Prentiss. In any case, we start with Prentiss. Henry Lovey had drawn this column. This is Benjamin Prentiss's troops that are entering Ironton after disembarking right over here from the railroad, the Iron Mountain Railroad, after coming from St. Louis. And Grant had been in Ironton about a week. He got ready to go and attack these Confederate troops that were south of him, but then in the process, that threat just disappeared. But Grant didn't know it. He was getting ready. He sent some units out getting ready to attack. And all of a sudden the train comes in and here's Benjamin Prentice. And he's got an order from Fremont. It might have been a mistake. I don't know. They made a lot of mistakes back then. But basically he said, I'm relieving you, hand over the command to Benjamin Prentice. And Grant kind of huffed off and got on the train and went to St. Louis. And he felt, at least, that he had been, well, he was the senior of the three Illinois generals, and that he basically should have that command. Well, anyway, obviously, Fremont didn't agree. So Grant arrived in St. Louis, and to put a date on this is about the middle of August of 1861. And nobody's listening to him complain, and he said, we need you to go to Jefferson City, because there were troubles brewing out here. The whole state was essentially on fire in August of 1861. So he came to Jefferson City. He, as those of you who saw the exhibit know, he stayed for about a week. We know that he stayed in the City Hotel on High Street. I don't think anybody knows where he actually made his office, although likely it was wherever the military telegraph was, which I think was probably the train station. But when he wanted to bed down for the night, he would go to the City Hotel, which is where the Central Bank building is now. He's here about a week, and here comes the train again. Now this time a colonel from Indiana, named, believe it or not, Jefferson C. Davis, gets off the train. He walks in with an order, and basically the order says, General Fremont wants to see you in St. Louis. It's kind of like Groundhog Day, I guess, to Grant. But Grant always did what he was told, obviously. Doggone it, that same day that Davis handed in that order, he was on the train and he was in Fremont's headquarters that afternoon. I think it took about 5 hours in those days by train to get from St. Louis.
You say Jefferson Davis?
Yes, Jefferson C. Davis.
Not the head of the Confederate?
No, he's an Indiana Union colonel. Yeah, it's just confusing. In any case, to Grant's surprise and delight, it wasn't that he was going to St. Louis to get another demotion or whatever. It was because the high command in St. Louis decided that they needed Grant. First of all, they decided that he was the most senior of the Illinois generals, but they needed Grant to go down to southeast Missouri and take on a major command, which was his first major command, in which basically opened the sky as far as Grant's career was concerned. And that he started out in Cape Girardeau, and that leads me back to General Prentice. Let's see what the next picture is. Ah, there it is. I have never seen a picture of this man when he was smiling. I don't think he was smiling, but in any case, here's how the thing was set up at the time. The next character in this discussion, Jeff Thompson, was about 5 miles south of Cape Girardeau. And I'll tell that story in a little bit, but because of that, that's why Fremont decided to send Grant down there. He went down there and simultaneously Fremont withdrew an order he had sent the day before, I think, to Prentice. Prentice was supposed to go down there, and I tell you, mistakes were being made. Prentice would go down there, and he would be the one to lead the Union armies after Thompson. Something happened in a day's time that caused Fremont to bring Grant back from Jefferson City. And Grant got on a steamboat and he went down there. And Prentice got the order then. senior officer, when he arrives, he is to take command, and he was also told that he needed to stop in Jackson with his troops. Now, Jackson is still the capital, the county seat of Cape Girardeau County. But that's where the men were going to head down south and try to cut the State Guard troops off. Grant gets out of his hotel room. He stayed at the St. Charles Hotel in Cape Girardeau, incidentally, for those hotel fans. And to ride out to Jackson to meet the troops and to meet Prentice. And as he rode down the one street, he saw a cavalcade coming the other way. And there were the general and his staff, and sure enough, it was Prentice. So he went around and came back the other way and confronted him. What are you doing? And Prentice was still insisting that he was the senior commander. Grant disagreed in the strongest possible terms, and Prentice attempted to arrest himself because Grant wouldn't arrest him. So, but anyway, long and short of it is, all of that finally got straightened out. Prentice, mostly because he lived longer than most other people who could tell the tale. Prentice was the fellow credited with saving Grant's hide at the harness nest 7 months after this incident. So that story at least ended well. Candidate number 3, and the one you've been waiting for, General M. Jeff Thompson. I've seen it written a lot of ways. Some people say his real name was Meriwether Jefferson Thompson. I think perhaps Jeff is just a nickname, because some people say that. But in any case, he usually went by Jeff, sometimes M. Jeff, and he was, as you see, the master of the swamps, I mentioned. But this remarkable image, it's about, I'm not sure what year this is, but it's about the time of the Civil War, and those of you who are familiar with the Boot Heel, well, I was about to say we'll recognize this, but no, we won't recognize this, because this is what the Boot Heel was like in 1861. And actually, you can see here, there's a train right where the green spot is at Sykeston. And they had to bridge all these swamps because, and it's down to my friends at Cape Girardeau who like to tell the story. Anybody from southeast Missouri, incidentally? That when they finished the Panama Canal in the early 20th century, they took the equipment from there and brought it to the Boot Heel and drained all the swamps. And I think that's true. At least I trust those people to tell the truth. But in any case, so this was what Grant was dealing with. This is what Prentice was dealing with. And let's now take a look at our General Jeff Thompson. I'm going to explain what the Missouri State Guard is, for those of you who are not familiar. And essentially, how it is that Thompson got there. Those of you with any Southern sympathies at all, and I will admit to having some myself, this guy was a godsend to the Confederate troops in southeast Missouri, and he had absolutely no military training. Before he became the general of the Southeast Division of the Missouri State Guard, he was the mayor of St. Joseph. And he probably would have been famous already because he was the fellow who handed off the first mail to the first Pony Express ride in 1860. But then war breaks out. He's from Virginia. He wants to become involved, and actually, they say that he actually went to Richmond to try to volunteer to become a Confederate soldier, and they didn't want him. So he came back, and he was running around with a group out of, I think it was Ripley County down there, when an opening appeared for the first district for the general commander. Now and I did not explain the Missouri State Guard, but here's what happened. The day after the incident in St. Louis, Camp Jackson incident, you all may have heard about, the governor and the legislature created the Missouri State Guard, and it was to be a defensive force, at least that's what they claimed at the time. And they had the benefit of having an awful lot of soldiers who had fought out in Kansas and stuff, who leaned into the southern side, although they were completely untrained as well. They were the ones, along with the governor, who got chased out of just this morning, Jefferson City, in June, and then followed by the Battle of Boonville. The original, so the state army, the state guard, was divided into 8 different divisions or districts, and the original general of the Southeast District was a fellow by the name of Nathaniel Watkins. And those of you familiar with that area probably know of the Nathaniel Watkins Conservation Area. No. Well, it's there. I've been by there, but it is the country estate of Nathaniel Watkins, who was the half-brother of Kentucky's Senator Henry Clay. And because of his standing among the southern community, they said, well, why don't you be the general? Well, to his credit, he decided by middle of July 1861, well, this isn't, I signed up to be a defensive force, this isn't the way it's working out, so he just quit. So essentially, it's not like they ran an ad in the newspaper, but the word of mouth mostly got around, because Jeff Thompson hears that there's going to be a meeting at a campsite and they're going to elect a colonel. So he rides over, there's actually still a marker there, a little bit south of Dexter, Missouri. And the men who had been commanded by Nathaniel Watkins were meeting there to elect a new general. And Thompson buys himself a white Charger. He dresses in a big old, almost sombrero with a red sash and just a Bowie knife stuck in his. This is all according to his memoirs. And he goes in there, and sure enough, the men elect him as Brigadier General of the first district of Southeast Missouri. He goes, and I tell you, I don't know where he got it, but he goes to work. And within a matter of days, he's making connections with the Confederates who were over on the Tennessee side. Whoops, did I press the Close your eyes. Oh, come on. Oh, I got it. Okay. Let me pause and take it. Where was it? All right. Kentucky had declared itself neutral. Okay. And as a result of the geography down there, Tennessee, who was not neutral, is only 5 miles by river south of New Madrid. And so in July, late July of 61, the Confederates who were operating out of Memphis and Gideon Pillow, who has the reputation of being one of the worst soldiers in the history of both the U.S. Army and the Confederate Army, was in command of the troops in the neighborhood of New Madrid. And they crossed over and they were heading up towards Sykes. And those were the troops that got very, very close to Cape Girardeau, even though the regular Confederates, and a lot of people don't realize this, there was Confederate infantry from Mississippi, along with Mississippi cavalry and some other cavalry, who got as close to Cape Girardeau as Benton. And this is why Grant got sent down there. And And this is where he met, essentially, Jeff Thompson. So that's why I mentioned Grant salvation. Before I leave this particular subject, I want to read you how Thompson was described by a certain Israel Gibbons, who was a reporter for the New Orleans Crescent, who had an opportunity to meet Thompson. I think it was in September '61. Quote, "Let me picture this man to you. Imagine a tall, lean, lank, wiry-looking customer, at least 6 feet high and slender as a pair of tongs. A thin, long head with a very long nose, what you would call a hatchet face, thick yellow hair combed back of his ears and bobbed off sharp, displaying a very long and thin neck." And the guy's article actually was on a couple of paragraphs, but I would be embarrassed to read any more of it, as much as he loved this man. So he was an unusual character, to be sure. Let's see how we're doing. This is also, and I'm going to try to get quickly through here, this is also about our friend Jeff Thompson. I am going to posit that of all the things that Jeff Thompson was responsible for, this is probably the most important. So anyway, I say he's back because after, well, what happened was that Tennessee invaded Kentucky, notwithstanding their neutrality. All of the troops that had been in Missouri went back and went up to Kentucky. And so Thompson was pretty much left up with his own devices. There were no Confederate troops around. And come October, he comes back. And the way he comes back is in the most unusual way. Grant has now moved down to his Cairo, Illinois, and that's where he has his headquarters. And his operations are pretty much all over Kentucky, and some even in Tennessee, I think, at that time. And Thompson gets together his cavalry, they were called dragoons back at the time, and he had 500 men on horses, and he rode with those men 100 miles from down in the swamps to a place just a few miles south of DeSoto, Missouri, about 50 miles south of St. Louis. And all of the attention in the country and all the attention in Missouri was down in Kentucky, and all of a sudden, here's Thompson. This happens at a place called the Big River Bridge, south of DeSoto, on the early morning, pre-dawn hours of October 15, 1861. I want to tell you about the Eagle and how it landed in Missouri on October 14, 1860. Have you heard of Old Abe,
Yeah.
the War Eagle? Yes, sir. Well, this is Old Abe in Chicago, Illinois. He had become very, very popular. He was a pet of the 8th Wisconsin Infantry, who trained in Madison. And the word was all out already. Now, you see, he or she, I think they've done DNA tests now, but he was still, what do you call it, fledgling? He wasn't, he's a bald eagle, so it doesn't look yet like a bald eagle. But he was so famous already that somebody drew him while they were transferring trains to come to St. Louis. So they get to St. Louis, actually on the night of October 13th. They cross the river on the 14th so that they can listen to some politicians speak. It's going to get too long because that's all related to what happened in Jefferson City as well. They march up to what was called Benton Barracks in St. Louis and bed down on the night of the 14th. And on the morning of the 15th, word reaches town, the big river bridge is out. And some of them have to go down there. In fact, a couple companies of them, this is their second night in the war zone. They were sleeping in the rain without tents in DeSoto. Grant, now in command, sends some columns from Jeff City and Cape Girardeau to cut them off before he can get back to his base. And they meet in Fredericktown. And I left out one little part. In Fredericktown, in St. Louis, the Eagle had gotten loose from its tether and was flown around the city, and so the men were particularly careful. So they tied him to the courthouse roof in Fredericktown, and since they were the rawest troops, they were sent all the way back, the back lines to guard the wagon and the train. Well, now, I could risk calling him already the Screeching Eagle, because here's a quote from 1885 in a prominent biography of the 8th Wisconsin by Frank Flowers, his name. Old Age, the 8th Wisconsin Warrior, describing Fredericktown. As the rattle of musketry, the hastening of ambulances, the shouting of officers, the screams of projectiles, and the shrieks of the wounded burst upon Old Abe's senses in the full tide of battle, he became wild with excitement, leaping and screeching. Well, when questions come, and they're probably coming pretty soon, you asked me questions about this, but that shoulder patch comes from Fredericktown. It started in Fredericktown, Missouri on October 21, 1861. I will have to spend some time on Jefferson City.
You're talking about the Screaming Eagle?
Yes.
For the one first?
Yes.
That was Old Abe.
Yep.
Abe.
People talk about fortunes.
The eagle that's on the patch.
Okay, now
The eagle came from this old
this is the last segment.
eagle.
And again, remember what the question is. Who is the nemesis that we've been describing? This one I've written in blue because Fremont was not Frank's nemesis. Actually, Fremont was his own nemesis. You know his story. I'm first going to describe very briefly the battle of Belmont, and basically how Grant turned the tables on Fremont rather than vice versa. Now, I say that, although it's always been subject to speculation what exactly happened. But Fremont had been in a lot of trouble, and in fact, when I mentioned how the Eagle Regiment had gone and listened to some politicians, one of them was the Secretary of War who had just been up to Tipton to basically tell Fremont that his days were numbered because he just wasn't getting anything done. And there was a little controversy, not a little one, about him freeing slaves, but for another day. But in any case, they were, the powers that be were done with Fremont. They let him go down to Springfield. It took him another 10 days. But by November 2nd, actually they had somebody chasing him around who left St. Louis with an order that he was done for. And they found him south of Springfield on November 2nd, and he was fired. And he, by the way, peacefully, he was peaceably. But on that same day, his adjutant in St. Louis, per his orders, no doubt, ordered Ulysses Grant to demonstrate against a place called Columbus, Tennessee, which was Columbus, Kentucky, which was this huge fortress on the east side of the Mississippi, opposite a little town in Missouri called Belmont. The order said specifically, do not bring on a battle. Just make a demonstration. Don't bring on a battle. Because at the time, they were worried about a lot of other things in the central and southwest Missouri. Then comes Jeff Thompson. On November 2nd, well, first of all, this is the day that Fremont gets fired. The newspapers are full of the stories that he's going to be fired. And on the 2nd, Grant gets a order from that adjutant saying, oh, by the way, Jeff Thompson has 3,000 troops out west of there, out west of Bloomfield. Go send some troops out there to meet him. Well, he sent 3,000 troops, which was about almost a third of all the troops he had under his command, and he was still supposed to be making a demonstration against Columbus. Well, in the space of a few days, because the battle happened on November 7th, he switched the whole order thing around, excuse me, and he made an attack on Belmont. And I guess we all know the answer. He lost, but he got some good experience for the troops he had, those who weren't killed. So that was the story of Fremont and Grant out there. But let's talk about the Bohemian Brigade, if I may. Grant has been here basically the last week of August. He's gone and done what the Union Army's facing as Sterling Price slowly making his way to Lexington, Missouri. I mean, slowly, but Fremont's not able to do anything to stop him. That's basically what brought about his comeuppance. But in the meantime, while Jefferson City had been deserted pretty much by the troops that were heading up to Lexington, the artists like Henry Loving, the New York newspaper reporters, they all started flooding into Jefferson City. And when you think about it, the reason it's kind of clear is because there was nothing going on in the eastern United States. They lost the Battle of Bull Run, they turned the keys over to McClellan, and he just sat there. So it was like fun. But anyway, long and short of this is, in a hotel in Jefferson City, it was either the McCarty House or it was the Virginia Hotel right by the Capitol building. A newspaper man from New York coined the term Bohemian Brigade, which is a phrase that has been used ever since, including up through World War II at least, to describe war correspondence. And these guys, what they did is they got here and they had nothing to do, and so they cavorted around, they raced horses, they did all kinds of things, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures here. First of all, let me show you this. If you can see that, this is a drawing by Henry Loving, who I mentioned. I'm sure I get this right. He drew for Frank Leslie's Weekly Magazine. He's the guy who drew Marin. This is on a shelf of land about, I'll explain how to get there because you can still see it. This was October 5, 1861. He drew all of Fremont's troops. He drew Fremont, he drew Mrs. Fremont, he drew the Fremont children, and they were all here basically creating a publicity event while he was getting ready to move out to Tipton and then on to Jefferson City. But if you go down to Broadway and start at McCarty Street and drive south 1 mile, the road will turn and become Linden. And in 1 mile, you'll reach the point and go to, there's a Catholic Charities place, pull up the driveway and look out and you'll see that spotted stuff. But I will now answer questions. Anyone? My friend Bill wants to have a question.
Yes, that's my neighborhood. I think we went out
I
there
think we did, and it's still
to look at what was called Camp Lily.
Camp Lily.
After the Balkans.
Yes, and that was probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But the happy news is it's still there, and the unhappy news is that it's not been marked and nobody recognizes it. So please come forward and help us. Anybody else? Shirley? Oh, well, we've got to answer the question about who the nemesis of the story is. Any idea? Come on. Who's the nemesis? I mentioned we've ruled out John Fremont. Well, now,
Said the name somewhere?
let's go back to that definition if I can find my way back. We've got 3 contestants. Simon Good. These again are 2 modern definitions of the word nemesis. Simon Good. Francis.
Tom.
And Tom.
Tom.
Okay, well, I don't want to have a vote on it, but who mentioned, how many votes do we have for Thompson? Okay, now, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many votes for 6, 7, 8? How about any votes for anybody else? Well, I want to throw something else in the mix here. Nemesis is the name of a Greek goddess, the goddess of retribution. And now this is a definition. This is the old meaning of the term nemesis. This is from something called theoi.com. There's a lot of sources that define who she was. I just picked one that happened to be convenient from that article. Nemesis was the goddess of indignation against and retribution for evil deeds and undeserved good fortune. And actually Nemesis had a sword in one hand and a scale of justice in the other, because her job in Greek mythology was to make sure everybody had about the same amount of luck over the lifetime. So basically what I posit to you is that the nemesis in the story is none other than Ulysses Grant. Because Ulysses Grant went about with the sword of Nemesis, cleaning the Union Army of all the laziness, the foolishness, and all the undeserved good fortune, and turn that army into one of the best there ever have been. Anyway, thank you for your attention.